Hello, and welcome to the online workshop of Spirituality and Ethics, Applications to Counseling Practice. We are so glad that you have taken the time to be a part of this workshop. We feel confident that the workshop will meet the following 4 objectives. Participants will be able to define spirituality and religion. Participants will be able to identify ways in which spirituality can manifest in counseling sessions. Participants will be able to describe ethical considerations of spirituality listed within the American Counseling Association, or ACA, Code of Ethics, and participants will be able to identify the competencies for addressing spiritual and religious issues in counseling, provided by the Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling, or ASERVIC.
We are both counselor educators. My name is Jenna Minnix, and I'm an LPC supervisor. I serve on the faculty here at the Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas, and we are a CACREP accredited Master of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling program. Our mission is to prepare counselors to provide spiritually competent mental health services in both urban settings as well as rural, underserved communities.
And my name is Awa Jangha. I'm the Lois Henderson Wessendorf Assistant Professor of Spiritual Integration and Counseling and direct the Spiritual Integration and Counseling Initiative here at Seminary of the Southwest. Prior to being able to discuss spirituality and ethics, we need to delve into the definition of spirituality, and by virtue of close association, we will also delve into the definition of religion. When we consider the terms religion and spirituality, what do they really mean? Take a moment to consider what the terms mean to you personally. Sometimes it helps to consider the first words that come to mind when you think of religion and the first words that come to mind when you think of spirituality. Feel free to pause the video here if you want to take a few moments to write down the words that come to mind. What we find in the research literature is that there are many different definitions for these 2 terms. It is not surprising that there may be varying personal definitions, but what may come as a surprise is that within the field of counseling, we do not have a consensus on one operational definition of each. Fortunately, many of the definitions have similar characteristics. Let's begin with reviewing definitions of religion. In 2017, Bohecker, Schellenberg, and Silvey defined religion as organized, more ritualistic systems and practices of individuals or groups of individuals with specific beliefs that are sometimes inseparable from culture. ASERVIC describes religion as not the same thing as spirituality, even though religion can be a part of one's spirituality. Religion has also been defined by Eugene Kelly as the codified, institutionalized, and ritualized expressions of people's communal connections to the ultimate. And Julia Corbett defined religion as an integrated system of belief, lifestyle, ritual activities, and institutions by which individuals give meaning to or find meaning in their lives by orienting them to what is taken to be sacred, holy, or the highest value. Some commonalities across these definitions include the concepts of ritual, community, institutions, and specified beliefs. Spirituality, on the other hand, has been defined by Kenneth Pargament as the search for what is sacred. It has been described as a personalized understanding of what brings meaning to life and what is individually determined to be sacred. ASERVIC described spirituality as drawing out and having the infusion of spirit in one's life, while spirituality has been defined by Kelly as a personal affirmation of transcendent connectedness in the universe. One definition that I find to be helpful is from Bohecker, Schellenberg, and Silvey. They describe spirituality as including various outlooks on life, such as atheism and agnosticism, and define it as a way of being in the world that acknowledges the existence of transcendent or unknown dimension in life that is intrinsically found within all human beings, internal and individual, and it goes beyond religious or cultural boundaries. Finally, based off of her previous research, Brene Brown in her 2017 book, Braving the Wilderness, defines spirituality as recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Some commonalities across these definitions include the concepts of personalization, meaning, and sacredness or transcendence. Notably, spirituality does not have to be theistic or spiritually linked to religion. Religion often includes an experience of authority, ritual, tradition, and a means of understanding the meaning and purpose of life. For some clients, the words spirituality and religion are one and the same, but for others, these two are very different components that have been polarized. This is especially true for a growing demographic of people who identify as spiritual but not religious. These distinctions between these two concepts are important to consider not only for our work with clients, but also personally as clinicians. We can better serve our clients when we are aware of our own perspectives on touchstone concepts, such as spirituality and religion, which can be a large component of one's identity. Awareness of how we understand the two terms can help us navigate countertransference and allow us to be more open in our conceptualization of clients who may have similar or differing understandings of religion and spirituality.
The spiritual and religious landscape of our community will be unique to our culture and geographical region, and getting to know the makeup of our community can help us to prepare to meet the unique cultural needs of that community. Here at the Seminary of the Southwest, we are preparing counselors to serve urban and rural communities throughout Texas. And the 2014 Pew Religious Landscape Study found that of adult Texans, 77% identify as Christian, 31% as evangelical Protestant, 23% as Catholic, 13% as mainline Protestant, and 6% as historically Black Protestant. 1% identify as Mormon, and less than 1% as Orthodox Christian, Jehovah's Witness, or other Christian affiliations, respectively. Of the Texans surveyed, 4% identified as non-Christian, 1% as Jewish, 1% as Muslim, 1% as Buddhist, and less than 1% as Hindu or other world religions or faiths, respectively. 18% of Texans surveyed reported they are unaffiliated, what is often referred to as religious nones. Nones meaning N-O-N-E-S. And 2% identify as atheists, 3% as agnostic, and 13% as nothing in particular. And less than 1% responded, I don't know. So as licensed professional counselors and counselors in training, our state's licensure rules, as well as our ACA Code of Ethics, informs us of what we are ethically responsible to do as counselors to meet the needs of our community. And here in the state of Texas, our LPC rules define a counselor's role in terms of service to a client's spiritual development and well-being. Texas LPC Rule 681.31 addresses counseling methods and practices. And this rule defines individual counseling, group counseling, and family counseling as that which uses interpersonal, cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic, and affective methods and strategies to achieve mental, emotional, physical, social, moral, educational, career, and spiritual development and adjustment throughout the lifespan. Additionally, our 2014 American Counseling Association Code of Ethics encourages counselors to recognize spiritual support networks of clients, that's in section A1D, and to attend to our own self-care by maintaining our own spiritual well-being as counselors. That's in section C in the introduction. Our ethics also discourage us from discriminating against clients based on religion and spirituality. That's in section C5. And we're encouraged to be aware of the impact of areas such as spirituality when assessing clients. That's found in section E8. Additionally, other professional associations also offer similar encouragement. For instance, the National Association of Social Workers, NASW, Code of Ethics states that social workers seek education and understanding of social diversity and oppression, including religion, and refrain from criticism on the basis of social diversity, including religion, and seek to eliminate discrimination in respect to social diversity, including religion. And the APA, the American Psychological Association, along with AAMFT, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, also includes similar statements, including religion as an area of multicultural diversity to be attended to with competence, respect, and protection from discrimination. In practice, these ethical standards can feel complex sometimes to navigate between a supervisor and a trainee or a counselor and a client. Using an ethical decision-making model can be helpful to us as we seek to support the religious and spiritual diversity and well-being of the people we're serving, and do so in a helpful and ethically responsible manner.
One such ethical decision-making model has been created by Jeffrey Barnett and W. Brad Johnson in 2011. It guides clinicians through the process of deciding whether to integrate religion and/or spirituality in your counseling treatment plan. One caveat to keep in mind is that this model was published prior to the 2014 ACA Code of Ethics and also does not mention the ASERVIC Competencies. Nevertheless, it proposes an intriguing model. Barnett and Johnson raise some important considerations to keep in mind prior to the use of this model. I will highlight just a few of those considerations. First, being a member of a particular religion and spiritual community does not necessarily make one an expert or competent in providing spiritual or religious counseling. Consultation and training are still of utmost importance and should be held in tandem with a sense of curiosity for the client's individual experience. Second, as clinicians, we should develop self-awareness of any tendency to minimize the significance of spirituality or religion with clients, to pathologize spirituality or religion, or to mismanage our own countertransference. This level of self-awareness will inform our ability and competency in the use of this model. Third, if one is both a counselor and a minister or clergy member, then potential boundary issues should be explored and clarified prior to your work with the client. Fourth, if you include spirituality and religion as a specialized approach to counseling, then both your approach and your qualifications should be included in the informed consent process. Fifth, religion and spirituality are both strongly encouraged to be included in your standard initial assessment and as a means of determining the impact of spirituality and religion on the lives of your clients. Counselors should respect the client's expressed desire of whether or not to address religion and spirituality in counseling, and the degree to which they would like to address religion and spirituality. Finally, it is wise for clinicians to create or have access to a list of religious and spiritual community resources. Now that we have reviewed these considerations, let's walk through the decision-making process, which includes 9 stages. Number 1 is to respectfully assess the client's religious, spiritual beliefs and preferences. This ties into the consideration of including religion and spirituality as a part of the initial intake process. It may also be helpful to have established religious or spiritual assessments available, whether they be explicit or implicit in nature. As religion and spirituality can be highly personal values, it is important to be intentional about addressing these concepts with respect. Number 2 is to carefully assess any connection between the presenting problem and religious or spiritual beliefs and commitments. This assessment helps to clarify the nature of the presence of spirituality and religion as a strength, hindrance, or indifferent aspect of their presenting problem. It is also here that one can consider the presenting problem in light of the client's religious and spiritual identity, practices, and community. Reviewing the Code of Ethics can also provide useful discernment in regards to considerations when working with spirituality and religion in counseling. Number 3 is to weave the results of your assessment into the informed consent process. This allows you to communicate the results of your clinical assessment to your client and empowers them to be able to be aware of and collaborate on the direction of treatment. If the client is willing to address and include religion and spirituality in their work, you can begin to develop a treatment plan and can seek the client's informed consent prior to the implementation of that plan. Number 4 is to honestly consider your countertransference to the client's religiousness. Authentic consideration of your own stuff that may arise is important to spend time and reflection upon and can possibly prompt seeking out consultation or supervision. Number 5 is to honestly evaluate your competence in this case. Here, creating a review of what your awareness, knowledge, and skill set are within spiritual and religious matters that pertain to the client's counseling needs can offer a wealth of information. For example, you might identify areas that could benefit from further enrichment, resources for that enrichment, and determine whether it is realistic to gather what is needed to help the client in the time frame available. A review of the ASERVIC Competencies may also facilitate this evaluation process of your competence in addressing spirituality and religion. I would add within these stages to include a common stage found within other ethical decision-making models, which would be to consider and brainstorm a variety of possibilities of providing services to this client, i.e. whether to work with the client, refer if the needs are beyond your expertise and competence, seek adjunctive services that complement your work, or determining whether the various spiritual-oriented interventions you might utilize might be. Within this ad hoc stage, I suggest here that one can discard any options that go against the ACA Code of Ethics and can continue to narrow down the other options when going through the remainder of the stages in this model. Number 6 is to consult with experts in the area of religion and psychotherapy. It is often useful to get the perspective of others who specialize in this area, and those perspectives can help to refine the options within your decision-making process. This can be in the form of communication with trusted colleagues, learning through research, or specific training. If countertransference was identified, then consultation or supervision with trusted professionals can be helpful as a means of processing your countertransference. Number 7 is, if appropriate, clinically indicated and the client gives consent, then consult with the client's own clergy or religious professional. This, of course, is considered on an individual basis and only if appropriate to the client's concern and consent. If consent is given, the perspective of the client's clergy or religious leader can also help in refining the options and coming closer to a decision. Number 8 is to make a decision about treating the client or making a referral. Here, one needs to evaluate the benefits and risks of integration for your particular client. This can include evaluating the literature that supports the intervention you are considering, assessing the moral principles of maleficence and beneficence, and consideration of additional consultation with experts in making your decision. As treatment is an ongoing process, this model has an additional stage if you decided to treat the client, and that is number 9, assess outcomes and adjust the plan accordingly. Keeping in mind that change happens, it is useful to monitor not only the treatment interventions for effectiveness, but also it is a good practice to make personalized adjustments to the treatment plan as needed.
It may be helpful at this point to turn our attention to a case study. How about we think through a situation that could arise between a counselor and client in which the counselor may find it complex or maybe unclear how to support the client's spiritual and religious well-being within the clinical context. Let's imagine we ourselves identify however we personally identify. And then let's imagine ourselves now working with an LGBTQ client who identifies as Christian and is deeply committed to their church community, and they consider their religious commitments to be a social, spiritual strength for them, while also reporting some distress and conflict with some church members who hold a non-affirming posture towards gender and sexual diversity. This is a complex dilemma. And in our counseling with this client, we will want to thoughtfully support our client's spiritual, religious, social, emotional, and sexual development and well-being. So let's think through how Barnett and Johnson's ethical decision-making model might guide us in our thinking about how to serve this client's needs. Okay, recalling the first step in this model, we will imagine conducting a respectful assessment of the client's spiritual and religious beliefs and preferences. Let's imagine as we do this, our client reports finding that their church involvement is extremely important to them. It feeds their spiritual health, and for the most part, they report feeling supported, welcomed, and loved by their pastors and church members. Great. What's next? Well, along with that, we'll carefully assess any connection between the client's presenting problem and their religious or spiritual beliefs and commitments. In this case, we're imagining the client is reporting some distress, which we understand to be the result of conflict our client is having with a few select church members who hold non-affirming positions towards the client's sexual orientation. And these are church members who, unfortunately, the client does not seem to be able to avoid if the client wishes to participate fully in their church community. And because church commitment is so important to this client, it's important that we find a way to support the client's right to worship in their home church or wherever and however the client chooses. So we have a dilemma arising. How do we support this client with the distress this conflict is causing while not putting pressure on the client to leave a church they love or challenge their spiritual and religious commitments? Well, this takes us to the third step in our ethical decision-making model. So we'll work to weave the results of our assessment into the informed consent process so the client can be made aware of their options. For instance, we might let the client know we understand the value of church involvement in their life and that we want to support their desire to worship in the faith community of their choosing and be free from harassment or undue conflict. And if we feel ourselves to have a limited familiarity with the client's particular church affiliation, we might disclose that fact and offer to help connect the client with a counselor who may have more insider knowledge if the client feels that may be beneficial to their discernment process. Or we might ask the client to sign a release of information to allow us to consult with someone with greater expertise on the client's particular religious group, so we could obtain some guidance on what might be possible and what have other clients in similar situations found helpful. All of this might be included as part of the client's informed consent. So say the client feels comfortable with us and wants to work with us on this conflict. That takes us to step 4. So now we'll honestly consider our own countertransference reactions to this client situation and the spiritual and religious components of this case. In doing some self-reflection, we may notice ourselves wishing the client would just leave their church. Or we may notice ourselves feeling angry at this client's church or frustrated that they aren't better equipped to serve LGBTQ members well and protect them from harassment. All of that leads us to the 5th step. Once we identify those feelings, we can honestly evaluate our own competency to serve this client. We can decide what support we need in order to work with this client and not impose our own feelings or wishes onto the client. We may find supervision or peer consultation helpful to us in processing and determining our level of competency in this case. That may lead us to step 6. We might decide in order to serve this client well, we would benefit from consulting with other experts in the area of this client's particular religious affiliation. So now we're ready to move forward with treatment planning. Applying step 7 in our ethical decision-making model, we might discuss with the client the option of us consulting with their pastoral team and the persons at the client's church whom they feel loved and supported by. With the client's signed authorization, we may decide it's helpful to reach out to 1 or 2 of the leaders in the client's own church and ask their guidance in how to support the client with this dilemma. This may lead us to the 8th step, where perhaps we might imagine that our phone call with the client's pastor has sparked some interest among the leaders in the client's church, where they would now like to hold a community-wide discussion about diversity and equipping their members to identify and eliminate harassment within their community. This may end up yielding some wonderful outcomes. So let's imagine this course of action feels hopeful to the client, and they now feel even more supported by us as the counselor and by their clergy. If so, then 9th and finally, we'll continue to support the client in assessing the outcomes of this process, and we'll adjust our plans going forward to ensure our counseling work with this client continues to serve their needs. There is rarely a simple, straightforward path when navigating complex clinical and ethical decisions, but at the same time, having an ethical decision-making model like this can help us think through the various options as we seek to support our clients' spiritual, religious, social, emotional, and sexual development and well-being.
I would just like to mention that often in counseling sessions, when religion or spirituality is discussed, it can manifest as a strength or support the client, or it may manifest as a hindrance or source of tension or emotional pain. Being aware of these possibilities can help you navigate the decision-making process of whether integration of spirituality is pertinent within the treatment of your client. We are now going to take a little time to review the ASERVIC Competencies. There are 14 competencies spread across 6 major areas. As the preamble states, these competencies are guidelines that complement the ACA Code of Ethics and are meant to be used in conjunction with counseling approaches that are evidence-based and that align with best practices in counseling. We will briefly review these 6 areas, which include culture and worldview, counselor self-awareness, human and spiritual development, communication, assessment, and diagnosis and treatment. There are 2 competencies within culture and worldview, which focus on having a basic understanding of the similarities and differences between the concepts of religion and spirituality, and between some of the major world religious beliefs. There is also a focus on being able to recognize when there is a presence or absence of spiritual and religious beliefs central to the worldview of the client and how that impacts their psychosocial functioning. The area of counselor self-awareness has 3 competencies within it. Competent counselors in this area are able to explore their own attitudes, beliefs, and values as it relates to spirituality and religion. It is so important to know where you stand on your own views and perspectives so as to be able to recognize if your views begin to impact your work or influence your client. In addition, counselors are encouraged to be cognizant of their own limitations and scope of competency. Not only must we recognize our limits of understanding, but we should have spiritual and religious resources available to provide consultation or referral. The area of human and spiritual development contains 1 competency, which calls counselors to be able to describe and apply varying models of spiritual and religious development to their understanding of their client's human development. This helps to establish parameters of typical development in the conceptualization of the presenting problems of our clients. The area of communication is one of the most meaningful areas to me because this area contains 3 competencies that pertain to the primary tool of our work, our communication. Counselors are encouraged to apply sensitive acceptance to the client's communication about spirituality and religion. Beyond being accepting, the words that counselors use should match that of their client's spiritual and religious perspectives. So for example, if a client refers to God as she, then the counselor should use that same pronoun when referencing God in the counseling conversation with that client. This shows respect and communicates to the client that you have heard them and are open to continuing to hear their perspective. In addition, counselors recognize and discern if it is appropriate to address the spiritual or religious themes that arise in the client's communication. For instance, lack of forgiveness may be recognized as a theme the client mentions that they struggle with working through. The area of assessment has 1 competency, which mentions including spiritual and religious information within the general assessment process. As mentioned previously, this can broaden your understanding of the client's perspective, and even if they report not wanting to discuss spirituality and religion within the context of their presenting problem, the assessment will at least provide some direction for the work that you will do. The 6th and final area is that of diagnosis and treatment and contains 4 competencies. Regarding diagnosis, it is important to be aware of how the client's spiritual and religious perspectives can support or hinder their well-being or exacerbate their symptoms. During the process of creating goals, counselors can be collaborative in their creating goals that are consistent with the spiritual and religious beliefs of their clients. Regarding interventions, counselors are able to either modify existing therapeutic techniques by including spiritual or religious perspectives, or they can use spiritual or religious practices as their techniques. For instance, one might modify the empty chair technique to have the client speak to God if that is consistent with the client's beliefs and treatment goals. Or one might use a prayer journal as homework to capture the same aspect of treatment. Also, counselors apply theory and current research to support the work of counseling when addressing the client's spiritual and religious perspectives and practices. Here, looking at what research theory and techniques have worked with spiritual and religious clients can support your therapeutic choices when considering how to competently work with those with similar beliefs.
In closing, we'd like to leave us all with a couple of questions for reflection. The first is, how has my own spiritual and/or religious well-being contributed to my development as a multiculturally competent counselor? And second, in what areas of spiritual and religious competency would I like to continue to expand my understanding and skills to be able to support my clients' spiritual and religious development? For the last portion of this online CEU, we would like you to experience what it's like to create your own spiritual life map. Spiritual life maps are a spiritual intervention that can be used with clients, but it is also important to experience this process for yourself first. Also, as a means of working on the ASERVIC competency of personal spiritual awareness, we encourage you to create your own spiritual life map. Take about 20 minutes to follow the directions on the following slides in creating your spiritual life map. Take the last 10 minutes to go through some of the process questions. These are useful for self-reflection and can also be used as a part of a clinical intervention with clients. You will need a sheet of paper and writing materials, preferably colored pencils, pens, markers, or crayons, but a pen or pencil can also suffice. You're going to create a roadmap, like a timeline, that captures your spiritual journey from the earliest you can remember to the present day, and even beyond if you want to dream and imagine the future. Think about your spiritual experiences over time. How might you imagine the path from one experience to another? Is it smooth? Is it bumpy? Is it a straight line or is it circular? Think about the major life events that have occurred in your life, like marriage or a death or children coming into your life, or maybe a loss. And how was your spirituality present or absent during those times? You may find it helpful to use pictures or symbols, numbers, words, or different colors to depict the various events. Some folks have used hills, bumps, potholes, or weather like rain or lightning or sun to capture their different experiences. Consider also how those around you, your family, friends, community, and society have utilized spirituality and religion during those major times in your life, and how that might have also impacted your spiritual life map. This is driven by you and created by you. There's no right or wrong way to do this, so have fun. The next slide includes an example of what a spiritual life map may look like. In working with clients, be curious and try to stay in the present moment. This can be a great opportunity for building rapport and showing multicultural openness. For instance, when working with clients around their spiritual life map, we might ask them, "Tell me about what you've created. What were your thoughts about spirituality at these major challenging times in your life, and also at the major celebratory times in your life? When did your view of spirituality perhaps conflict with those of others close to you, and when were they in sync?
And how might that have impacted your daily life, your functioning, your stress? Also, what things might you want to continue to do or start back up that you once did in the past? What things do you not want to continue to do? Or that you do not want to bring with you into the future, pertaining to spirituality or religious practices or belief systems? And finally, what was this experience like for you? Did you find anything from this life map was surprising for you? At this point, we invite you to pause the video and take about 20 minutes to create your own spiritual life map. And then in the last 10 minutes, perhaps go through some of those process and reflection questions for yourself.
We hope the time we've spent together today has inspired us all to learn more about how to support our clients' spiritual and religious well-being in a multiculturally and ethically competent manner.
Dr. Zhang Ha has created a spiritual integration and counseling database of resources pertaining to spirituality and the counselor competency domains like assessment and testing, psychopathology, and clinical courses, and career development, etc. You can find it online by searching for guides.ssw.edu and typing in spiritual integration and counseling. We thank you for joining us for this training and invite you to keep in touch with us. You can find our contact on the webpage for the Seminary of the Southwest at ssw.edu. And for those of you wishing to receive CEU credit for having completed this training, you can submit your evaluation of the training electronically, and you'll be provided with a 1-hour CEU certificate. We offer free CEUs to our supervisors, alumni, and community partners on a regular basis. And we look forward to staying in touch with you and continuing to partner with you. Thank you.
Thanks.